The evening light drifts low across the fields of Gettysburg. Grass sways gently where once the ground shook beneath cannon fire. The hum of summer insects rises and falls like a memory breathing, steady, fragile, alive. And somewhere, deep in the earth, it's as if the air itself still trembles, remembering. These fields look peaceful now, green, endless, forgiving. But beneath every blade of grass lies a heartbeat once silenced in war. Here, more than 50,000 men fell, sons, fathers, brothers, their last breath swallowed by gunpowder and prayer. Their blood turned the soil red, their cries stitched into the wind that still moves across these hills. Because these fields are not silent, they remember. A soldier from New Jersey once wrote of what he saw after the battle. Faces blackened and bloated beyond recognition, glassy eyes staring up at the blazing sun. Another, Sergeant John Inglis, whispered into his diary, "How many that were full of life this morning now sleep the sleep of death?" And from the bombardment of July 2nd, Calvin Haynes confessed, "The air was filled with shells bursting in every direction. Such a sight I never wish to see again." The war ended on paper, but not here. For some, the march never stopped. The voices never quieted. What walks these hills is not history. It's memory refusing to die. Thank you for being here and for helping keep their stories alive. Tonight, before we begin, tell me in the comments, if you could stand here among these resting souls, what would you say to honor them? Your words, like theirs, will never be forgotten. Now, let me tell you about what still walks in Gettysburg when night falls. The night over Gettysburg was moonless. A heavy, humid stillness that made even breathing sound too loud. It was past midnight when Sergeant David Cole and Specialist Andrew Drew Lawson of the 104th Infantry, National Guard Engineering Unit, began their sweep through the rocky ravine of Devil's Den. Their duty was routine, a thermal imaging reconnaissance drill, testing navigation and communications gear across uneven terrain. Each carried an M4 carbine, a PVS-31 night vision headset, and radio-linked body cameras. Cole, a veteran of 2 overseas tours, led quietly, boots crunching over gravel. Lawson followed a few paces behind, logging readings on his wrist tablet. The wind carried the faint scent of damp earth and summer moss. To most, Devil's Den was a tourist site by day, a labyrinth of gray boulders once drenched in blood. To the soldiers tonight, it is just another training ground. But then, as they rounded a cluster of jagged stones, the air shifted, cold, unnatural, as if the night itself had drawn in a sharp breath. "Cole, you feel that?" Lawson muttered, rubbing his arm. His breath fogged briefly in the warmth. Cole adjusted his headset. "Barometric drop, maybe. Keep eyes open." Then came it. Static crackling in both radios. Not random white noise, but rhythmic bursts. Pop, 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 pop. It echoed faintly in the distance, like musket fire muffled by time. Cole froze. The sound wasn't coming from their frequency. "Did Range Command patch in artillery feed?" he asked. Lawson shook his head. "Negative, sir. Our net's isolated." A low wind hissed through the rocks, and beneath it, another sound. The faint rolling of a drum. Soft at first, then steady. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm came from the valley below. "Probably campers," Lawson whispered. But the sergeant was already lowering his rifle. Nobody camps inside the park perimeter this time of night. The man's outline shimmered, barefoot, wearing what looked like Confederate gray, His coat was torn, his posture upright, eyes locked somewhere beyond them. Cole reached for the mic. "Range command. We've got possible civilian on site. Request verification." Static. No reply. The figure turned slowly toward Little Round Top, raised his arm as if pointing the way for unseen troops, then vanished. Not a blink, not a blur. 1 second he was there, the next, gone. Both soldiers stood motionless, ears straining. Lawson broke the silence. "We're recording this, right?" Cole tapped his camera. Was. Now it's dead. He checked the battery, drained to 0. The backup on his belt blinked once and powered off too. Their scopes flickered, HUDs collapsing into static. "Equipment malfunction," Cole muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Then, all across the ridge, faint lights appeared. Small, pulsing amber glows weaving between the rocks. They moved like lanterns in the slow procession, yet left no beam, no reflection. A sudden gust cut through, bringing the metallic tang of gunpowder, so sharp Lawson coughed. The drumbeat grew louder now, joined by distant shouts. "Forward! Keep the line!" Cole gripped his rifle. "You hearing that?" Lawson nodded. Every word. And then silence, as if the world had exhaled and gone still again. 2 days later, back at the command center, their recordings were reviewed. The footage cut out precisely when the figure appeared. Yet on the thermal map, a brief outline of a human shape at 40 degrees Fahrenheit glowed in a place where the outside temperature read 75. When the video resurfaced in local archives, the shape matched another image taken over a century earlier. A barefoot Confederate soldier captured accidentally by a tourist's camera in the early 1900s. Same spot, same pose. Coincidence, they said. But neither Cole nor Lawson returned to that ridge again. For that same summer, 2 Civil War reenactors camping near Triangular Field, just south of Devil's Den, reported a drumbeat echoing through fog before dawn. "There's no drummer assigned tonight," one joked. The other listened, pale. "Then who's keeping time?" They weren't the first to hear it. Locals tell of a young drummer boy, barely 13, who was among the first killed when Confederate sharpshooters opened fire on July 2, 1863. His small body was never recovered. And yet, the rhythm of his drum is still said to roll through the valley before the mist rises. Steady, sorrowful, and unending. Weeks later, a group of reenactors resting on Little Round Top after a humid afternoon drill spoke of a Union soldier who appeared suddenly from the tree line. His uniform, they said, was immaculate. The stitching, the brass buttons, the old Springfield rifle slung over his shoulder, every detail perfect. He smiled faintly, greeted them as if they were his men, and handed one of them a handful of cartridges. "Be ready," he said. "The next assault's coming." Then, as they looked down at their hands, the man was gone. When they showed the bullets to park rangers the next morning, tests confirmed they were authentic 19th century musket rounds, untarnished by time. Historians classified it as an intelligent haunting, a spirit aware of the present, capable of interaction. But what came next was far darker than echoes or souvenirs. On a stormy night that same autumn, an ROTC cadet posted a message on a military discussion forum. He described staying in a cabin near Devil's Den with his sister. Woke up around 3 a.m., he wrote, to the smell of burned powder. Thought maybe a short in the wiring. Then artillery, distant rolling thunder, but patterned, not random, like volleys. My sister's camera flew off the table, hit the wall. Cold spot in the corner of the room, 30 degrees colder than the rest. He ended his post with, "Felt like the ground outside was vibrating, but nothing moved." His words spread quietly among service members, because every soldier knows the language of battle, even when it comes from beyond the grave. Cole, now retired, still refuses interviews. But once, during a veterans gathering in Harrisburg, he told a single story off record. He said that on their way back from Devil's Den that night, as they crossed the open field near Plum Run, their radios suddenly crackled alive again. A clear voice broke through, faint but unmistakable. "104th, hold your position. Wait for my signal." Cole answered automatically. "Say again?" But the reply came in an older code, one phased out before Vietnam. Then silence. Lawson checked his unit ID later. The call sign 104th once belonged to a Pennsylvania regiment that fought at Devil's Den in 1863. Every man in that regiment was either killed or wounded. None survived. What happened that night has never been explained. Equipment logs showed no transmission from command, no cross-frequency bleed, no civilian interference. Just one strange note at the bottom of the report, scribbled in Cole's handwriting. Heard command from the past, sounded alive. Even now, park rangers sometimes find unregistered radio pings along that ridge, faint bursts on dead frequencies, short, clipped, almost like Morse. Maybe it's interference, maybe it's something else. But those who stand long enough among the rocks of Devil's Den swear the air begins to buzz. A static that crawls beneath your skin, a whisper through broken time. And if you stay past midnight, they say, you might hear it too. The muffled beat of a drum, the hiss of powder, and a voice calling through the dark. Hold the line. Soft pause, lower tone. They say some soldiers never got the order to retreat, and they're still waiting for the next command. Weeks later, as investigators tried to make sense of what the soldiers and reenactors had seen, strange reports began surfacing miles away, not from the fields, but from inside Gettysburg itself. Whatever haunted the open ground had followed the living indoors. Midnight at Gettysburg College is supposed to be quiet, the kind of quiet that hums softly through empty halls and fluorescent lights. But that night, it wasn't. Linda Reyes, the campus maintenance supervisor, was finishing her rounds. Clipboard in hand, keys jingling faintly as she checked the final systems for the night. The building she worked in, Pennsylvania Hall, had once been a Civil War field hospital. She'd heard the stories, the screams, the surgeries, the soldiers who never walked out. But Linda didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in maintenance reports and light bulbs that needed changing. At least until that night. She pressed the basement button on the old elevator. It rattled down, humming its usual protest. Then, a shudder. A sudden halt. The doors slid open. And for a heartbeat, Linda forgot how to breathe. The cold hit first, sharp, unnatural. The sterile concrete basement was gone. In its place, a dimly lit room bathed in lamplight. The air reeked of iron and rot. Men in blood-soaked aprons moved frantically from table to table. Screams, orders shouted. Clamp that artery. Hold him still. She could see it all. Soldiers laid out on makeshift tables, limbs exposed, surgeons sawing, the floor slick with blood. Her flashlight slipped from her hand and clattered onto stone. Stone, not concrete. Panicking, she slammed the elevator button again. The doors shut, hard. When they reopened, everything was normal. The basement lights flickered softly. The floor was concrete again. Her flashlight lay where it had fallen. Linda stumbled out, gasping. The temperature climbed back to normal. But that smell, faint, metallic, and unmistakable, it lingered. She didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe it? But the image, the doctors, the blood, followed her even in sleep. And then, 1 week later, she read something she couldn't ignore. A caretaker at the George Weichert farm, just north of Little Round Top, had reported footsteps in the attic, heavy pacing every night around midnight. He said the upstairs door, an old wooden latch, would never stay shut. He'd close it. It would creak open minutes later. One morning, he found a dark red stain on the floorboards near the window. He scrubbed it clean. By nightfall, it was back, darker. The report ended with his line, "I hear him pacing, always at the same hour, like a surgeon making rounds that never end." Linda's heart pounded as she read it. The room he described, it looked just like the one she'd seen when those elevator doors had opened. She decided to drive there herself. Curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe something inside her needed to prove it hadn't all been in her head. The farmhouse stood silent under a moonlit sky. Its windows looked like eyes, dark, unblinking. Inside, the boards creaked under her boots. She climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. At the top, that same door, and on the floor beside it, faint streaks of brownish red seeping between the planks. She knelt. The wood grain pattern, the same as the one she'd seen through the elevator door. Exactly the same. She touched the floor. Cold, damp, and beneath it, faint vibrations, like a heartbeat deep inside the house. Then came the sound. Step, 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 pacing above her head. Deliberate, slow, heavy. She turned to run, but the latch clicked. The door swung open, and from the darkness beyond drifted a single breath, raspy, human, and close. Hold him still. Her flashlight flickered, then died. When she stumbled outside minutes later, gasping for air, the night was perfectly still again. No footsteps, no whisper, just crickets and the whisper of grass in the wind. But she wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was watching. The next morning, Linda couldn't shake the feeling. So she went to another site she had heard whispers about. The Daniel Lady Farm. There, in 1863, Confederate troops had set up another field hospital. Visitors had reported seeing lights glowing in the barn at night, even when it was locked and empty. She met the current caretaker, an older man named Frank Dolan, who told her quietly, "You'll want to see this yourself." He led her into the barn. The smell was faint, but familiar. Iron and decay. Frank pointed to the floorboards near one of the stalls. "Watch." For a moment, nothing. Then slowly, a thin line of dark liquid began to push through the cracks. It shimmered under her flashlight, spreading in tiny threads like veins. Within seconds, it stopped. The droplets dried into small, crusted beads. Frank sighed. "Happens after heavy rain," he said softly. "Only here. Sent it for testing once." Linda looked up, and he hesitated. Came back positive for human blood. Driving home that night, Linda replayed it all in her mind, the elevator, the pacing, the blood that wouldn't vanish. And then, The whispers began again. Not loud, just faint, riding on the hum of her car engine. A saw's rasp, a wet gasp. Then the same voice, calm, measured, weary. Hold him still. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. But in the mirror behind her, for half a second, she thought she saw a flash of white. An apron, a face smeared with shadow, watching from the back seat. She didn't look again. By dawn, she sat outside Pennsylvania Hall, trembling. Sunlight warmed the steps, chasing away the chill. Yet, when she placed her palm on the old brick wall, she felt it, a faint thrum, deep and steady. A pulse. 3 houses, she whispered. 3 centuries apart, but one heartbeat. Because somehow she knew it wasn't just her imagination. The buildings of Gettysburg were alive with memory, breathing the pain of those who died inside them. The war's echoes weren't trapped in sound or sight. They were embedded in the very bones of this town. And if walls could remember, maybe they could bleed too. Low pause. But the story doesn't end here. What came next was darker, because as the night deepened again, the ground itself began to move. Not the walls, not the rooms, the fields. And in those fields, something was stirring. Something vast, silent, and waiting. Because even the open fields of Gettysburg had begun to breathe. The whispers from the hospitals never truly faded. Even after the last echo of saws and screams had quieted, Gettysburg refused to sleep. For weeks, strange things rippled across the town. Flickering lights, unregistered radio bursts, the low hum beneath the earth that felt like a heartbeat buried under miles of soil. And then, it moved beyond the buildings, beyond the barns, the floorboards, the walls that bled. Because now, even the open fields, the quiet, endless fields, began to stir. The sky above Cemetery Ridge burned with the faint orange of a dying sunset, fading slowly into gray. It was supposed to be another calm night, quiet, routine, uneventful. Sergeant David Miller and Corporal Aaron Lee, both from the United States Army Reserve Security Detachment, had drawn the twilight perimeter patrol along the ridge, the same ground where, over a century and a half earlier, Pickett's charge had thundered across open field and flame. Their orders were simple: sweep the area, check perimeter sensors, and make sure no late tourists had wandered into restricted ground. They carried M4 carbines, night vision goggles, and short-range encrypted radios clipped to their shoulder straps. Miller led the patrol. Lee followed, scanning with a handheld thermal scope. They'd done it many times before. But that night, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt loaded, thick, like the air before a storm. As dusk melted into full night, a thin fog began to rise, rolling low across the grass. Visibility's dropping fast, Lee murmured, his breath visible despite the summer warmth. Miller nodded. We'll finish the sweep and double back. He clicked the radio twice, their standard comms check. Static, no response, no echo from command, no ping from sensors. Just the hiss of interference. Then, faintly, another sound crept in beneath the static. Footsteps. At first, Miller thought it was his imagination, the echo of their own boots bouncing back from the fog. But then it grew louder, heavier, multiplied. Thump, 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 thump. Dozens, no, hundreds of synchronized steps, marching in perfect rhythm. Lee froze. You hearing that? Miller raised a hand, quiet. The rhythm drew closer, rolling like distant thunder over the field. And then, between the bursts of static on his radio, came a voice. A rough, commanding tone, cutting through the noise. "Forward! Keep the line! Forward!" The sergeant's eyes darted toward the ridge. "That's not coming from our frequency." Before Lee could respond, the fog split open.
You hear that, Sarge? Yeah, sounds like boots. Could be tourists that slipped the fence.
Tourists don't march in formation.
Eyes up. Keep your safety on, just in case.
Out of the mist, ranks of soldiers emerged, gray-coated men with rifles slung over their shoulders, bayonets catching faint moonlight. Their faces were pale, drained, blank as porcelain, eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. Miller's voice cracked. "Identify yourselves." No response. "Stop where you are." They didn't. The line of men advanced, steady and soundless, except for the rhythm of boots, thousands of boots, striking the ground as one. Lee's hand tightened around his rifle. "Orders, sir." "Hold position," Miller whispered. The first ghostly ranks reached them and passed through. A wave of cold shot through their bodies, sharp enough to make Lee gasp. His visor fogged, his knees buckled. Miller's heart hammered, his hands trembling despite years of combat calm. He turned, and just like that, they were gone. The fog hung still. The field lay empty. Not a single mark on the ground. Only silence. A silence too complete, as if the world had stopped to listen. They filed their report at 200 hours. The video feed had cut out completely, just black frames and a burst of electromagnetic interference right before the encounter. Data logs later confirmed it. An energy spike across multiple sensors, centered exactly on the field where Pickett's charge had once advanced. Still, Miller wasn't the first to experience it. Years earlier, Carlos Mendoza, a retired park ranger, had written of 5 soldiers seen crossing the same field under a full moon. They walked in single file, rifles in hand, faces hidden in mist. Mendoza and 2 friends had tried to follow, but the figures never grew closer, no matter how fast they walked. When they turned back, the 5 soldiers were behind them, still marching, still silent. They looked tired, Mendoza later said. Not angry, not haunting anyone. Just tired, like they didn't know it was over. Another veteran, a retired major, once camped in the woods nearby with his unit buddies. They were all combat men, unshakable, pragmatic, immune to ghost stories. Until, just before dawn, they woke to a sound that didn't belong to any century. A single scream, human, piercing, raw. "Medic!" They scrambled from their tents, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through fog. But there was nothing. No tracks, no movement. Just the smell, smoke and sulfur, old and acrid, hanging in the trees. Then came one more sound. A low moan carried on the wind, like a dying breath stretched across miles. The major later said it was the only time in his life he'd seen hardened soldiers too afraid to speak. They left at sunrise, without a word. Back on the ridge, Miller returned one afternoon, unable to shake the memory. He stood at the same spot where the phantoms had appeared, staring at the long, open field stretching toward the Confederate line. The grass waved gently in the breeze, harmless, ordinary. But as he closed his eyes, a faint tremor brushed his boots. The ghost of movement, He heard it again. The rhythm, the drumbeat beneath the soil. And this time, it came with the faint call of a bugle, carried by wind that wasn't there. Lee later asked him what he thought it meant. Miller just said quietly, "Maybe they're not haunting us. Maybe they're still fighting." Lee frowned. "After all these years?" "Not years," Miller replied. "For them, maybe it's still that same moment. The charge that never ended." He paused, looking out at the horizon. Or maybe it's the ground itself, replaying what it remembers. Because in Gettysburg, memory isn't just a word carved on a monument. It's alive. It breathes. It walks. Every night, someone hears the same rhythm start again. Boots against earth, hearts against time. As if the field is stuck between worlds, echoing its final heartbeat from 1863. Maybe these aren't ghosts at all. Maybe they're echoes of men who refuse to surrender to silence. And if the earth can replay their final steps, what else might it be keeping? What else still moves beneath the grass when the world goes dark? Because what comes next is something stranger than any haunting. Something that might just prove the dead still have a signal left to send. And scientists, as impossible as it sounds, believe they might be right. The ground beneath Gettysburg never truly rests. Long before blue and gray clashed, this land already drank blood. Tribal battles, ambushes by the creek, war cries carried through ancient woods. Locals say the soil remembers everything, and maybe that's why, when 1863 came, the earth didn't resist. It simply opened its arms to another generation of dying men. At Hummelbaugh Farm, history took its most human breath. There, General William Barksdale, his uniform torn and soaked, was laid under a tree, whispering one word again and again: "Water, water." He died reaching for it. His dog refused to leave the spot, howling until its heart gave out. Every year, near that date, the same mournful cry drifts through the fields. A single, sorrowful note that seems to rise not from a throat, but from the land itself. Some call it a ghost. Others call it loyalty that even death couldn't silence. But not all hauntings speak with emotion. Some vibrate in frequency. Beneath Gettysburg runs a thick vein of black granite, threaded with quartz, known as the Gettysburg Sill. Scientists call quartz piezoelectric. It reacts to pressure, to heat, to trauma. It can store and release energy. Now imagine tens of thousands of dying men, the sky alive with cannon fire, the ground quaking with thunder and blood. Every scream, every heartbeat, every death flash, trapped in the rock below like a recording. And when conditions align, humidity, lightning, or a storm rolling in, that rock plays it back. Boots, voices, bugles, echoes of agony turn to memory loops carved in stone. Then there's the quantum overlap theory, a name that sounds more like science fiction, but maybe isn't. Some physicists believe certain places act as thin spots between times. Two realities touch just for a moment. That's why a reenactor might meet a soldier who hands him authentic Civil War cartridges. Or why an elevator door might open onto a hospital from another century. For a heartbeat, 1863 folds into now, two worlds colliding like ripples in a pond. Researcher Peter Jordan once tried to test it. He planted electromagnetic sensors across the field, and every time someone reported seeing an apparition, every single time, his devices spiked. The readings were small but consistent. He said later, Something's talking back, just not in words. And the witnesses keep coming. A woman walking near Plum Run hears hoofbeats in dry grass, but no horses. A man smells pipe tobacco that follows him to his car and disappears the moment the engine starts. A family on the road sees a blue glowing soldier staring toward Little Round Top, fading only when headlights hit him. And in the cemetery, under the thin moon, a silent rider shadows visitors, never moving closer, never farther, until they whisper, "Do you see him too?" So maybe Gettysburg isn't haunted by the restless dead at all. Maybe it's haunted by time itself, by energy and sorrow replaying what can't be undone. Maybe every voice is an echo, every shadow a flicker of a world that refuses to leave. And maybe when you stand here, the chill on your skin isn't fear. It's the touch of history saying softly, "Remember me." Dawn comes slowly to Gettysburg. Mist curls away like breath leaving a body. Dew clings to blades of grass where once men fell in rows. Birds call across the open field, cautious at first, then braver, as if reclaiming the quiet. The fields of Gettysburg hum with memory. You can almost hear it in the wind, a pulse, a sigh, a name that never finished being spoken. More than 50,000 men suffered or died here. Sons, fathers, brothers, sleeping now beneath the same sky they fought for. When light hits the gravestones just right, they don't look like rows of marble. They look like a horizon of ghosts, standing at attention. War promised glory, but it delivered silence. And silence, deep, aching silence, is what still walks here. Maybe remembrance is the only way to make peace with it. Not to erase what happened, but to carry it forward to say, "We see you. We remember." Every time I visit, I feel it. That strange, watchful calm. It never feels empty here. The air is heavy with stories, and they're still being told if you know how to listen. So if you stood here tonight, with the wind tugging at your coat and the drums faintly beating under your feet, what would you say to them? Maybe just a few words. Thank you. Rest easy. And thank you for walking with me through their story. Your thoughts, your empathy, your words below. They keep these voices alive. The breeze stirs once more, soft, steady like a heartbeat beneath the earth. And from somewhere far across the field, a single drumbeat answers. The battle began in 1863, but perhaps it never ended.